Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures. Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures might be one of the most influential and important animated shows of all time, and yet it is very unavailable. It really didn't play on TV that much, only got on DVD in 2009. It's sort of criminally underrated, to be honest with you. A lot of what it would do would later influence things, specifically the Beetlejuice cartoon and Eek the Cat, and kind of more of the kind of looser animation style, I guess what I call the 6 a.m. Sonic the Hedgehog, but was the one that played weekdays in the 90s. A lot of that animation style is really from this show. Now, this was kind of much more of a critically acclaimed show at the time. It didn't even really get attention of like major awards or anything. It was really like, if you're an animator, this was the cool show to watch, because the 1980s, as I've said in countless other videos, was not a great period for animation. This came out at the beginning of the turning point, 1987, 1988. This kind of happened the same years as the Simpsons short started, interestingly enough. You started to see a sea change in animation, especially for a Saturday morning cartoon where everything was a proven property, everything was based on a toy, particularly with the new FCC regulations that opened those things up. You didn't really have creator-driven cartoons, and kind of the era that we're in now of the auteur cartoon show really came to be with the Mighty Mouse: The New Adventures. And especially because it was advertised and, all these interviews and so forth with Ralph Bakshi, who was a known, animation director at the time. It was very much like an auteur animated show. You knew this was being presented by Ralph Bakshi. So, which was different. This was before even that happened really with live action. You sort of Amazing Stories with Spielberg, but he wasn't involved in like every episode. I would say this is about like 2 years before Twin Peaks would happen. I'm not going to say this is like what started kind of prestige TV or creator-driven TV or something like that in the modern era, but it's certainly kind of like a building block in that. In fact, how ahead of its time it really was. That kind of looser, funnier action style is something that Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls would do later. And I think it's kind of interesting that this show like never aired on Cartoon Network. Maybe they tried to get the rights and couldn't. I know it only really aired on CBS, and then I keep reading briefly on Fox Kids in November 1992. I watched Fox Kids then. I do not remember the show at all. I didn't watch. I was like primed to remember watching Saturday morning cartoons. Theoretically, I had watched this, but I don't remember it at all. So I watch it now because I got this DVD of the entire show. It really didn't have that long of a life, despite how kind of it foretold what was going to happen with animation, particularly with Cartoon Network. I think Cartoon Network, and then especially this era, I'm surprised they haven't tried to rerun this, because it would fit right in, even with like something like Teen Titans Go and things like that. But this felt more different. This aired in the same block as Pee-wee's Playhouse, so things were starting to change, frankly. Mighty Mouse showed more of a looseness to an action show that you weren't really getting. Most action shows were pretty serious. They might have a few jokes, but weren't being as silly and joke heavy as this show certainly was. This show is not only Ralph Bakshi's kind of return to animation, because, by the way, Ralph Bakshi came from Terry Toons, did Saturday morning cartoons, did the Spider-Man show, did the Mighty Heroes, which actually come back in an episode of this show. He had done a lot. People kind of, obviously became more famous for Fritz the Cat and things of that nature. Had a long animation life before those things happened. So this is kind of a return for him, as much as it looks like at the time, probably, as him doing something different. But it was also John Kay's first show pre-Ren and Stimpy. Andrew Stanton worked on this like right out of Cal Arts. He got this job before graduating. Bruce Timm worked on this before Batman the Animated Series, which is interesting because the show had a parody called Bat Bat. So instead of Batman, it's just Bat Bat. Kent Butterworth, Mike Cazala, Libby Simon, Tim Minton, Jim Reardon, who wrote for The Simpsons, Vicki Jensen, and Jeff Pigeon, who went on to work on WALL-E. It had a pretty amazing crew of people who wanted to do different, sillier, crazier things. And some of them could be pretty out there and referential, and when the show became a little more focused in finding its voice, it could be better at that in times, and other times it would be like pretty off the wall crazy. It's interesting. It feels a little more constrained when John Kay only worked on the first season season. The second season didn't last. It had like 6 episodes, and those feel a little more concentrated, but I don't think they're necessarily better, frankly, because he was the supervising producer, and he was kind of like John Kay's kid at the time. He had worked on the Rolling Stones Harlem Shuffle music video with Ralph Bakshi. This show kind of references things much like what like Tiny Toons and Animaniacs would do quite frequently. It kind of reference things all over the place, which a lot of 90s cartoons would do, from like current pop culture stuff to legendary pop culture stuff. They have a Kirk Douglas obsession with this cow villain character who often sounds like a Kirk Douglas character to a businessman who plays into the infamous controversial episode, who's also kind of a Kirk Douglas type voice. They seem to be really into that. I don't think that was a big thing in 1988. It was just something they're into. They do reference what was going on in cartoons. In season 2, they have a Pee Wee Herman parody. They have one where Mighty Mouse is going through the channels while a kid is changing them and kind of looking at other cartoons like the Flintstones and the Jetsons and the Real Ghostbusters and Rocky and Bullwinkle, which is kind of funny because they use Rocky like Sylvester Stallone's Rocky. I think some of those episodes where they're really going after cartoons, those are probably the more memorable episodes, I would definitely say, because a lot of it does feel a little unfocused, because as much as it's called Mighty Mouse, you know, he's the titular character, he's presumably why you'd want to watch the show, but it felt like, obviously I watched this because of Ralph Bakshi, because of the people who worked on it, but it almost felt like that was what the show was really selling, because Mighty Mouse oftentimes like doesn't feel like a main character. I felt like his sidekick Scrappy was someone I understood more than Mighty Mouse. Mighty Mouse would be, you know, not show up. We get villain backstories. Like in the first episode, we get kind of a Mighty Mouse origin story, which was a mouse from another house instead of man from another world, I guess. That's the closest it gets to, you know, Mighty Mouse is actually a Superman parody. They don't play with that, despite the fact that the John Byrne kind of reboot had just happened. It's interesting they don't go for any of that. They don't really do a lot of Superman stuff. They do kind of Superman Batman stuff with Mighty Mouse and Bat, but other than that, and they do the Justice League a little, but they don't really do any direct kind of Superman stuff, which is interesting. A lot of times it does feel like Mighty Mouse is kind of like the kind of lead, but they kind of just have to deal with him. Like they wanted to do their own thing and they didn't really care about Mighty Mouse. And it does feel like, you know, the legendary story with the Mighty Mouse show is that Ralph Bakshi was basically like trying to pitch all over the place for Saturday morning cartoons. Nothing was sticking. Even like a John Kay show that had a lot of the characters for Ren and Stimpy, but I can't figure out like what that show was exactly. I don't know what all these other shows were, but him and John Kay helped develop them and they're ready to pitch them. I think it was NBC and CBS. We're not interested. But then at the end he said, what if I got the rights to Mighty Mouse? He didn't have the rights, made a phone call, got the rights, came back and made the Mighty Mouse show. And it sort of feels like the show wasn't developed, especially because Mighty Mouse isn't the focus of it, you know, which is so weird. It feels like a show written by people who were trying to figure out how to write a show and then went, oh right, our main character, we just kind of went with like what we wanted to do creatively. We didn't really think about what the show needed creatively. I think in a lot of ways you get some really interesting, odd choices with this. In terms of the animation landscape, this show was part of my childhood. In terms of my childhood, this show was like not actually part of my childhood. I did not grow up watching this. So I don't have necessarily like a sense of nostalgia for it or anything like that. It took me a while to get through it, but I watched all of it kind of in big chunks. I know it wasn't made to do that. It isn't, I think, flow-wise, the greatest show in the world. There's sometimes even where they would actually, there'd be 2 11-minute segments per episode, and there are about 4 different times where they're just clip shows. One of the 11-minute things would just be a clip show. One would be a episode that's just like clips of Terry Toons cartoons with music. There's one where Scrappy's talking over a cartoon, a couple cartoons that are cut together, which was sort of interesting, a Mystery Science Theater kind of thing. There are others where they use clips of previous episodes together, and one where Mighty Mouse plays his home movies, which are just clips from previous episodes, and he talks over that. There's about 19 episodes of the show, and for them to have basically like about 2 or 3 episodes of clip shows, and 3 of those segments are clips of basically like things that they didn't make, that gets a little lazy, and it kind of shows like the kind of slapdash kind of thing that they were making at the time. And I sort of like that energy to the show, but overall it makes it kind of feel a little bit of a, oh, we got this done kind of like rush job kind of a show with Mighty Mouse. Now, this show didn't really last that long because of the controversy. There are certain episodes I like, particularly The one kind of towards the end of season 1, which is it's episode 12. One's called Mighty's Benefit Plan, and the other segment is called See You in the Funny Papers. That's a really good episode that has a one which is a Chipmunks parody. It's basically like kind of a Dave and Alvin the Chipmunks, and they thought about it because they were in the same building as the people who were making the newer 80s Chipmunks, which I actually watched and have memories of that show actually. I haven't watched it in a while. I don't know. They didn't seem to like it. If I was into animation at the time, I probably wouldn't either. And they kind of go into how crazy it is that someone like made chipmunks like sing and do all this stuff, and they thought of the logistics of that, which is funny. And then the Dave character always has like Cheerios in his mouth. It makes that relationship of the chipmunks and Dave, in this time it's tree weasels though, not chipmunks, it seems more sinister and creepy. And then in the other show, it's basically like all these comic book villains come to life and Mighty Mouse has to stop them, and it's kind of done in a comic booky style. I think that one was pretty well done. But the Chipmunks one, the kind of part of it that I learned from the commentary that's a bit sinister is you have this like roadkill dog that's like basically narrating the backstory of the Chipmunks, because that seems to be a Mighty Mouse thing. Like, hey, here's a new character, let's get into their origin story so we don't have to deal with Mighty Mouse. Fine, whatever. They do that, and you're kind of like, well, we're watching it originally. I was like, oh, well, before I watched it with commentary, obviously. I was like, that's weird that they roadkill, but the show is kind of strange. So I guess that's their thing, whatever. And while I was watching it with commentary, I learned that basically, since they're in the same building as the people who are making the new Chipmunks, the guy who ran the Chipmunks and Ralph Bakshi had kind of a rivalry and didn't really like each other. And the guy who did the Chipmunks, who is I guess the son of the guy who made the original Chipmunk cartoon, had a dog who would like poop everywhere, and they'd get in fights over like, why are you letting the dog come in here and poop everywhere. But then the dog got hit by a car. So what you learned from this is John Kay and Ralph Bakshi decided to be really hilarious, and whatever writers wrote on that episode specifically, that their dog that had been killed should be then parodied in this Chipmunks takedown. And they even like make fun of the fact that the Chipmunks movie that they were specifically working on when they were making the Mighty Mouse show is parodied in the part where they go around the world, because they do that in that movie. Wow. Okay, guys, I don't know, this is just fucked up. It's just, I don't have a thing for that. That's fucked up. There was obviously the controversy with the episode The Littlest Tramp, where a parent who saw an episode air, kind of it had aired a couple of times, it was rerunning in the summer, where Mighty Mouse is basically smelling a flower that had been crunched down, and then he kind of sniffs it, and of course it goes up his nose. And they said it was a cocaine reference. I don't really think it is, and it goes by so quickly, you can barely get a shot of it before it fades to another shot. So if you're watching this and there's a clip of it and you're like, why'd that go by so quick? That's it. That's the whole thing. That's why the show was canceled. Not joking. I mean, the show is kind of weird and wacky, and having a critically acclaimed Saturday morning cartoon show wasn't exactly what people were into. And I'm sure, much like how The Tick was canceled later in the 90s, if you have a cartoon show on Saturday morning, and Invader Zim actually, if you have a cartoon show, a Saturday morning cartoon show that isn't appealing to kids, isn't selling merchandise, and isn't pleasing parents, there's really no reason to keep it on anymore. And I think Mighty Mouse kind of falls into that, where they're like, well, why should we keep this around? What's the point of keeping this around? And after the controversy that was on front pages of papers and was a big deal apparently, and then when it re-aired, they felt that they could take out the section, which it's not the most important section ever. It is a pretty crazy episode. When I was watching, I was like, this is a wild episode. Like, this was the only I felt like he was already triggered by the point he saw the flower thing. He was like, what the Sam hell? And like the American Family Association came after them. And then the show only aired 6 more episodes in 1988. Apparently did keep airing on CBS after that, I've read, until 1989, just in reruns, I guess, to fill out slots and things like that. But the show was basically over, and then everyone was able to move on into their respective careers. I think it's kind of a sad way to end it, because it was kind of such a creative, different voice at the time. And it's sad that it kind of goes down for that when, like, even in that cartoon, like, John Kay brings up, like, the husband and wife, when they go off, like, their car explodes in a mushroom cloud. When I talk about the tree weasels thing, he has the tree weasels in his pants and then prays while you can see the tree weasels moving around near his butt. It's like all sorts of weird, creepy stuff that was in this cartoon that they're just like, eh. But the 2-second little clip is like what brought them down, which I just find to be really odd. This is an important part of animation history. That's already kind of been established, and it should be more available. I think a streaming service should pick it up. It's a great find if you like 90s era Cartoon Network, this is a definite show you should absolutely watch. I can think of animation creators who, if they haven't directly been influenced by it, by like, you know, actually watching it and actually experiencing it and things, they have because of the influence it brought with other animated shows. It definitely shows a looseness to animation that really wasn't going on. If it wasn't done that well, it was usually because of more apathy and laziness than like, you know, what they were doing, which was much more creative and freewheeling and stuff, which was a definitely different energy at the time. It kind of was doing its own thing at a time when cartoons really, people weren't interested in them doing that. And I still don't think when you're doing kind of a different kind of cartoon and you only have certain air blocks for these things to air in, it really wouldn't work out for you, unfortunately. They did kind of like not listen to standards and practices. They would, you know, be a little wilder with this show. It's interesting to see like what John Kay was doing before Ren and Stimpy, Andrew Stanton, Bruce Timm, all these people working together. And it is one of those cases, like much like, you know, early King of the Hill or early Simpsons or certain seasons of SNL and other great shows, where you look at the writers team and you look at, you know, a behind the scenes thing and you look at all these like great creators and you're like, holy shit, there's no amount of money that could bring these people together in a room now. And Mighty Mouse had that for it, and has this kind of weird, strange little crazy show. Like it has a Silver Surfer parody for some reason. It's like some of the stuff I was like, okay, like season 2 felt like it was at least trying to be a little more palpable for the time period. Season 1 is really off on its own like tangent. I highly recommend the show if you're into animation and animation history. It's not really a show. I couldn't imagine anyone saying that's my favorite show. I just imagine they would go, oh, it's kind of in that vein. It's kind of funny. I don't know if it really could have lasted because I don't remember anyone really being a fan of this show. I watched the classic Mighty Mouse cartoons and things like that, but I don't remember this show specifically. And Mighty Mouse as a character doesn't get enough respect. This is apparently the 3 Mighty Mouse cartoons that are on here, the classic Mighty Mouse cartoons. That apparently was the first time those had been officially released. I think they'd been released on like dollar DVDs or something like that. Mighty Mouse as a character probably deserves a little more respect, and there's probably someone who could do something really interesting with it, and Ralph Bakshi and these guys actually went off and did that. I think you could do much more of a direct Superman parody with it, and that's probably, if you ever wanted to bring it back, the best way to do it. You could comment on everything with the Superman character that I'm sure Teen Titans Go has already done. But The New Adventures of Mighty Mouse is an interesting place in Ralph Bakshi's career because it was one of his more public 80s creations at the time, and it was kind of a way to bring back zanier, more cartoony cartoons right when Roger Rabbit and all the other great 1988 things that I've talked about in my series was doing. And this is kind of the one that doesn't really get the reception or the love it necessarily should, because it really did start off these people's careers. It got people talking about a zanier, crazier cartoon show in the mainstream press, and it actually did all those things. I think it is a good show, but I think one of the biggest problems with it is Mighty Mouse himself, because they were way more into doing these ideas than making a compelling character. And when I talk about Powerpuff Girls or Dexter or Johnny Bravo or any of the cartoons that were obviously very influenced by this one, they have a compelling character at the center of it. And Mighty Mouse, frankly, they just didn't really care about. And if this had been Scrappy's show presenting Mighty Mouse, or I don't know how you could accurately title this thing, but like if you had accurately made the show you're supposed to make, then it would have worked. It's interesting that when I talk about Bruce Timm or Andrew Stanton or John Kay, I talk about people who made memorable characters, from Ren and Stimpy to Wall-E to Batman the Animated Series. They're memorable characters on there that you can attach yourselves to, and when you think of those shows, you think of those amazing characters. When you think of Mighty Mouse, you think of Ralph Bakshi and those creators, and that's kind of really what hurts this show. It's what made this show great, but it's ultimately what made the show kind of only be in its own little weird animation world. And I think that's both a blessing and a curse when it comes to the fandom and the love for this show. But I think it's just amazing that it happened and he was able to kind of break the mold in TV animation and do something so wildly different when no one was demanding anything different from it. So if you have seen Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.